Thank you, Dr. Arabi. Thanks for having me today. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Good, okay. Yeah, Bill Fallon. I've been in engineering, materials engineering for 35 years, as Dr. Arabi said. I know materials engineering is not a major at the University of New Haven. However, I've never met an engineer that doesn't think he's a materials engineer. So I think you'll be able to use this general background in your engineering, whether it's mechanical, chemical, or electrical. What I'm going to do is give you a sense of the aircraft first, because it's important to know your product before you can apply your engineering skills to that product. So I'm going to give you an overview of helicopters, what their mission is, what they do. And then we'll transition into what the role of the materials and process engineer is. And then I'll give you a historical background on the role of materials in the aerospace industry and why they're important. And then finally, a quick glimpse of the future, what the future holds from our perspective. Okay, so what's unique about Sikorsky? Well, we make military and commercial aircraft. Our products typically have a life of 60 years. So it's not like your cell phone where you're getting one every 2 years. We have aircraft that were designed and built in the 50s and 60s that are still flying, still being supported. So it's important to know that essentially that's 2 generations of engineers that are working on the same aircraft or maintaining that same aircraft. So durability obviously is a huge factor in the products we design. Very unique in a lot of the engineering world in terms of the life of your product. Our development time tends to be long, and we're working on trying to shorten that. But typically it takes 8 years plus to design, develop, and qualify the materials and the structures for an aircraft. And then Sikorsky is a product integrator. We rely on hundreds of suppliers to build our parts that we then put together in the final form. Customer requirements dominate what we do. Dollars, schedule, design for sustainability are all customer-driven aspects that we need to consider when we're creating our design. Our vision statement is we pioneer flight solutions that bring people home everywhere, every time. So that speaks to longevity, durability, safety, and our ultimate function, which is to save lives. Sikorsky, when he invented the helicopter, one of his statements, most famous statements, was, if a man is in need of rescue, an airplane can come over and throw flowers to him, but a helicopter can come in and save his life. So the rotorcraft has a unique capability to go places where most other aircraft can't go. They're runway independent. You do not need a runway or an airport to land a helicopter. You need a clearing. You can land at sea, in rough waters, on small platforms. Where infrastructure has been compromised, in the case of natural disasters where you can't get traditional vehicles in, helicopters serve that mission. Katrina was a prime example. We go in very tough locations. This Spanish fishing vessel was grounded near some cliffs. There was really any other way to access that to save the people on board. Helicopter was really the only alternative, and one of our S-92s accomplished that mission under adverse weather, very adverse environmental conditions and surroundings. Another quote of Sikorsky was the quote I spoke of about if a man is in need of a rescue. This mosaic of photos really indicates not just the rescue aspect, but the kind of environments the aircraft has to fly and function in. Fires, again, natural disasters, inclement weather. I'm sure you've heard or seen of the movie Perfect Storm, where an aircraft had to go under terrible weather conditions to try to save those individuals. Since 1945, over 2 million people, civilians, have had their lives saved through rescues by helicopters. We have commercial aircraft whose primary function is either civil transport, offshore oil transportation, VIP transport, law enforcement, utility, emergency medical services, search and rescue. Our two primary platforms are the S-92, which is about a 19-passenger aircraft, and then the S-76. We have several versions of that, which is about a 6 to 8 passenger aircraft. Okay, so that's our product. Now, what does a materials and process engineer do? Well, again, my talk is going to be addressing materials and process engineer. You can translate that to mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, chemical engineer, because you all, in some manner, are either making material selection decisions or interfacing with materials engineers, depending on the size of the company that you end up working for. So, in my perspective, a materials and process engineer is the center of the universe. We support the structures, the engineering side of the house, which is the design of the product, structures test, how much does it weigh, reliability, maintainability, but we also are central to the manufacturing of the parts, working with operations, environmental health and safety, quality assurance, manufacturing and engineering, all depend upon inputs and controls from the materials engineer. And then even the management side, the business side, purchasing, program management, other business functions. The materials and process engineer has to help define the specifications for purchasing of product, whether it be raw material or somebody that's building a part for us. So we're really central to the entire business. It gives you a unique perspective of the entire business atmosphere of developing a product like a helicopter. Okay, so within each of those areas, what do we do specifically? Well, on the design side, we're characterizing materials. We're testing them, ASTM specs, Sikorsky specs that quantify the strength and the properties of a material and help the designer figure out how to best use that material for what they're trying to accomplish. On the process side, the operations side, we actually write the specs for how to make parts with those materials, how to control the processes, all the parameters to achieve successful parts every time on a repeatable fashion. A lot of what we do is optimize processes, we troubleshoot. If parts fail in the field or we get rejections in operations, the materials engineer working with the other engineering community often does root cause investigation and tries to figure out how to optimize that process. Aftermarket support. So once we deliver an aircraft, our job isn't done. An aircraft that's being used for 60 plus years, you have to continually maintain it. That includes maintenance manuals, again, troubleshooting for things in the field, safety analysis. Will that aircraft last 61 years? What's the life prediction for the materials and components on the aircraft? When do they need to be removed? When do they need to be replaced? The materials engineer is active in all those analyses. And then finally, when things break, why did they break? Was it the end of its life cycle? Was it an external event that was unpredicted? Was it a design error that underestimated a load? What was the nature of that failure? Did it fail in fatigue? Did it fail statically? Was it an overload? We have essentially a CSI-like approach to when materials break, whether it's when we're testing them or whether they're in the field. When they're in the field, a materials engineer has to do that failure analysis investigation to figure out why it broke and how to prevent it if it's preventable. And then finally, again on the business side, we pick the suppliers that will provide us the materials, the raw materials. We participate in the selection of suppliers who will build parts. We also get involved, again, troubleshooting their processes. If they're not successfully making parts on time to schedule to the quality we expect, we get involved in understanding what variables exist in their processes to try to improve them, control them, using statistics to make them better. So this really covers all aspects of engineering. So let's look a little bit closer at how do we pick materials that are appropriate for the design. Well, material selection is really an integration of understanding the properties of a material, the microstructure of a material, and how that material is processed or manufactured. So the science behind those elements leads to developing an understanding and ultimately design guidelines to the mechanical engineers, the electrical engineers, the chemical engineers, and how to use that material. Every material selection is a trade-off, and it used to be a triangle of performance, material properties. The mechanical engineers obviously want the highest strength material possible. The weight engineers want the lightest material possible, the lowest density. The managers want the lowest cost. So the materials engineer has to create properties for all three of those legs and help define the parameters for creating the optimum trade-off for a particular design. Now that became a pyramid about 10, 15 years ago when we added environmental sustainability. A lot of materials that perform perfectly well for performance, weight, and even cost are not good actors environmentally. And many of those materials we're trying to eliminate today. So we're trying to come up with material substitutions for things that are carcinogens or costly for maintaining long-term. So this trade-off pyramid really is central to every decision that's made for the selection of the material. This is a very old chart, and it's essentially, if you're familiar with Ashby plots, this is a plot of specific strength and specific modulus for materials. So it's basically trying to normalize that strength property, in this case, to density. So you're dividing that strength or that stiffness by density to get a relative value of that material for optimum strength to weight. Okay? And what you'll notice is there's a very great material right here in terms of specific modulus. So one of the best materials you could ever choose for high stiffness applications is beryllium. But you almost never hear of us using beryllium. Does anybody know why? Okay, that's one answer. So it's very expensive. The other answer is there's a medical condition called berylliosis. It's the equivalent of mesothelioma for asbestos. So there's a percentage of the population, about 20%, that has a sensitivity to beryllium dust, and it's fatal.